He said he didn't know. He said he thought he needed help figuring that out. He said he had been thinking about seeing a therapist. I told him I thought that was a good idea. I said it calmly, which took considerable effort, because underneath the calm I was terrified in a way I hadn't been since standing at the departure gate in Kyiv 14 years earlier, watching my old life become something I was leaving behind. Owen started therapy. I watched him go every Tuesday evening for 6 months, coming home quieter sometimes, lighter sometimes, occasionally looking like someone who had been crying in a way he found embarrassing but necessary. I did not ask what he talked about in those sessions because I understood they needed to be his. I cooked dinner. I helped Lena with her homework. I lay awake at night next to my husband and felt the distance between us with a precision that was almost physical, like a temperature drop. And then one Tuesday in April, he came home from therapy and sat down across from me at the same kitchen table and told me that he was gay. The room did not move. The house did not fall down. Lena was asleep upstairs, and the refrigerator was making its usual sound. And outside the window, the street looked exactly the way it always looked. And my husband had just told me something that reorganized the entire architecture of the last 9 years in a single sentence. I asked him how long he had known. He said he had always known, in the sense that the knowledge had always been there underneath everything, but that he had spent most of his life finding ways not to look at it directly, that he had loved me, genuinely, really, not as performance, and that loving me had made it easier to not look, that Lena had made it easier, that building something real with me had felt like evidence that the other thing wasn't true or didn't have to be, or could stay in the part of himself he kept the lights off in. He said he was sorry. He said it the way people say things when they understand that the word is completely insufficient and are saying it anyway because there is nothing else. I sat at that table for a very long time after he finished. I was not crying. I was doing the thing I do when something is too large to process immediately, which is go very still and very quiet and let the information settle into me like water finding its level. I thought about the 3 a.m. waking, the emptied out expression on his face in November, the therapy sessions. I thought about all the things I had told myself were about exhaustion or work stress or a difficult season. And I understood now what they had actually been about, and I understood that Owen had not been lying to me exactly, but that the truth he had been carrying had been too large and too frightening for him to know how to bring to me before now. I thought about the 22-year-old woman who had gotten on a plane with one suitcase and an address on a piece of paper, running from one thing and accidentally toward another. I thought about Helena's tomatoes, and the Saturday mornings at the coffee shop, and the waterfall in the Columbia River Gorge, and the wedding in the garden, and the night Lena was born, and Owen's face at 3 a.m. with the lights off, and the particular quality of his kindness that I had loved from the beginning and still love now, sitting across from him at our kitchen table, even while the ground shifted under everything. I said, I need some time. He said, I know. Take whatever you need. The next several months were the hardest of my adult life, and I have had some difficult adult months. We told Lena together, carefully, in the simple and honest language that children actually deserve and rarely get in situations like this. She was quiet for a moment, and then she asked if Daddy was still going to live with us. And we told her that we were still figuring that part out, which was true. She accepted this with the pragmatism of a 9-year-old who trusts that the adults in her life are telling her the truth, which put a pressure on me to keep being worth that trust. Owen moved into an apartment 12 minutes away. We had agreed, without much difficulty and with a sadness that was in some ways harder to navigate than anger would have been, that Lena needed both of us present and accessible and not weaponized against each other. We split her time as evenly as we could. We had dinner together as a family twice a month, the three of us, at a restaurant Lena chose each time, which meant we ate at the same two places in rotation because she had opinions and preferred consistency. I will tell you what I did not expect, which is that grief and love are not opposites. I grieved my marriage with a thoroughness that surprised me. Not because I had lost something false, I had not, and this distinction matters more than I can fully explain. What Owen and I had was real. His love for me was real, in the way that love can be real and still be incomplete, still be missing a dimension that neither of us could manufacture, no matter how much either of us wanted to. I grieved the version of the future I had been living inside, the one where we grew old in Portland and watched Lena become whoever she was going to become, together, in the same house. I grieved it the way you grieve something that was genuinely good and is genuinely over, which is its own specific kind of loss. And underneath the grief, surprisingly, confusingly, there was something else. Not relief exactly, something quieter than that. A gradual understanding that some of the distance I had been feeling for the last year was not something wrong with me or with our connection, but was the inevitable consequence of a truth too large to be contained indefinitely in the space of an ordinary marriage. And understanding that made the distance feel, retroactively, less like my failure than it had felt at the time. I called my mother in Ukraine a month after Owen moved out. She listened to everything without interrupting, which is not her natural mode, which told me she understood this was serious. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Are you safe?" I told her I was. She said, "Is Lena safe?" I told her yes. She said, "Then everything else can be figured out." This is my mother's philosophy in its entirety, and I have found it more useful than any more elaborate framework. I want to tell you about the year that followed, because I think it is actually the most important part of this story, more important than the revelation at the kitchen table, more important than the divorce papers we signed on a Tuesday morning in February at a lawyer's office on the East Side. The year that followed was the year I found out who I was without a marriage to organize myself around, which turned out to be both more frightening and more interesting than I expected. I started running. Not for any particular reason, just because I needed to do something physical with the feeling of everything, and running cost nothing and required only shoes and forward movement, both of which I had. I ran badly at first, and then less badly, and eventually with something approaching competence along the river paths near our neighborhood, early in the mornings before Lena woke up, in the gray Portland light that always looks like the beginning of something, even when it isn't. I started attending a Ukrainian community group that met on Sunday evenings at a church hall in Northeast Portland, something I had been meaning to do for years and had always found a reason to delay. There were 40 or 50 people there, different generations, different circumstances, all of them navigating the particular complexity of belonging to two places at once. I found in that room a version of myself I hadn't had access to since leaving Ukraine, a self with a language and a history and a set of reference points that didn't require translation. It was more restorative than I would have predicted. I went back to school. This was the largest thing, the thing I had been putting off since arriving in America, because there was always a more immediate need, always a rent payment or a work schedule or a reason to wait until conditions were better. Conditions were never going to be better. I enrolled in a community college program in social work, which felt like the right direction for reasons I understood more with feeling than with logic. Something to do with all the years of navigating systems that weren't designed for people like me, of understanding from the inside what it costs to be far from home and trying to find your footing in a language that isn't yours. Owen came to my graduation 2 years later. He sat next to Lena in the third row, and she made a sign that said, "Go Mama," in large, uneven letters that she had decorated with what appeared to be an enthusiastic interpretation of fireworks. I saw them in the audience before the ceremony started, and I felt something that I have thought about many times since, trying to find the right name for it. It was not the life I had planned. It was not the ending I had imagined when I stood at the top of that waterfall with his hand in mine 19 years ago, feeling something beginning. But it was real, and it was mine, and the people in that third row were the people who love me, and that was not nothing. That was, actually, quite a lot. I am not going to tell you that everything is easy now, because it isn't, because nothing worth anything is ever simply easy. Owen and I have had hard conversations and will have more of them. Lena, at 11, is beginning to develop the emotional vocabulary to ask questions about our family that require honest and careful answers. I am a year into a job at a nonprofit that works with immigrant women in housing transitions, which is work I love with a completeness that surprises me on a regular basis. Surprising because I spent so many years doing work I was simply grateful to have, and this is work I would choose, even if I had other choices. I am not with anyone. I have been on a handful of dates, carefully, the way you do things carefully when you have a daughter, watching how her mother navigates the world, and you want to model something worth watching. I am not in a hurry. I have learned, slowly and at some cost, that the instinct to fill an empty space as quickly as possible is not always the same thing as knowing what you actually want to put there. I am taking my time. The space is mine for now. Some evenings, after Lena is asleep, I sit on the back porch of the house in Portland. The same house I stayed. I couldn't leave the garden. And I think about the girl who got on the plane in Kiev because she was running away from embarrassment and accidentally built a life. I think about how many of the most important things in that life arrived sideways, through doors I wasn't looking at, in forms I didn't recognize as gifts until I was already holding them. The kindness of Helena and her tomatoes. A man who ordered black coffee and said thank you like he meant it. A daughter who makes graduation signs decorated with enthusiastic fireworks. Work that feels like a reason. I came to America with one suitcase and an address on a piece of paper. I did not know what I was going toward. I still don't, entirely, but I have learned to find that less frightening than I used to, and more like the actual texture of a life being lived rather than a problem waiting to be solved.